Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Mashinsky, Gold Investment Letter. Today's June 8th afternoon on Friday, a little bit before market close. We're going to be distributing this webinar over the weekend or on Monday to our paid folks and then also to our regular list next week. I'm super pumped today to have Frank Basa on with Canada Cobalt Works. This is a story that we got involved in, I believe it was a little over a year ago. We participated in a financing with the company. I think it was a 20-cent financing, started to buy some stock in the mid-20s, had a little bit of a downward move, accumulated shares, and the thing took off like a rocket fairly recently and has been hitting higher highs, higher lows. And some of the news coming out of the company has been extraordinary. And I thought it would be a wonderful time for investors to really get the scoop from the source. So welcome, Frank. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Eric, for having me here. Really appreciate it.
You bet. So I know you've got a new corporate presentation. I'll ask a few questions here and there, but why don't you just tell us the story?
Yeah, I'll start right from the first slide here. What we're looking here at, Eric, is it's actually a vein on the first level at the Castle Mine. Now, you'll notice the color pink. What happens is when the cobalt oxidizes, it actually turns pink. So it's actually easy to find. You can actually do it by visual. And so usually when you see pink like that, normally it's 1% or higher cobalt underground. In addition, we also have nickel, silver, and gold. So we'll just move along here. So I don't know how many people really know what's going on in the cobalt market, but cobalt is kind of a critical metal that they use in lithium-ion batteries, which is used in the electric vehicle market. Now, there's a significant shortage globally. I was out in Japan and China, and I went through Europe about a year and a half ago, and basically everybody was saying the same thing. They're all worried there's not going to be enough of cobalt to put in a lithium-ion battery so that people can have electric vehicles. Now, a lot of people also probably might not be aware of it. Cobalt is actually a byproduct of copper and nickel mines. And there's also another issue, which most people are probably not also aware of. 54% of the cobalt comes from the DRC, and it's considered conflict cobalt. So the majority of the battery manufacturers are looking for other sources besides this conflict cobalt. Now, with us, what we have actually a former high-grade producing mine. It was actually the highest grade mine when it shut down, and it had combination silver cobalt. And it was actually only a mine for the silver, but it's actually primary metal is actually cobalt. Now, this mine is part of a very large area called the Cobalt Camp. And over the years, over 500 million ounces of silver were taken out and 30 million pounds of cobalt. Now, the cobalt property is actually quite small. Now, we did that by design. We went out to the Cobalt Camp, and we worked at the Cobalt Camp about 30 years ago when we were part of Agnico Eagle. And then Agnico Eagle, the president passed away, and the new president let it go. And we picked up this asset basically for next to nothing, and was the most best value asset Agnico had. And it's a small land package, only about 2,800 hectares, but it's in the middle of the previously producing Uganda silver camp. Close to infrastructure, has 3 shafts and an adit. The important thing here is the adit. There's only 3 adits in the whole camp. There's over 180 mines apparently in the Cobalt camp, but only 3 have adits, and we have 1. And the other thing we also have is the agreement with the First Nations, which is very critical in Northern Ontario. Now, just to go over some of our recent news, and these are the things we just put out in some of our news releases. We are actually the only ones in the Cobalt camp that are underground through our adit, and we're actually modernizing it. We're switching to a tracklet system. Before it was track. We're putting in new water lines, air lines, a new ventilation system, and we're replacing the timbers as required. Now, the other thing we're going to do, we're going to start probably the first underground drill program in the Cobalt camp, because of course we're underground. And by doing a drill program underground, it's easier to find the cobalt and actually get better results for with less drilling. The other important thing is a lot of people have cobalt deposits, but majority of the cobalt deposits, either in Canada, the States, or anywhere globally, have arsenic in them. And we have the only process that I'm aware of that actually can take out the arsenic. And so we are doing some test work. We've been actually working at SGS Lakefield for over a year and a half. And what we're doing is we got the specs from battery manufacturers in Asia, and we're trying to meet their specs. So what we did was we did produce a very high-grade concentrate, which gave us about a 9% cobalt, about 6% nickel, about 9,000 grams per ton silver, and the critical number here is 50% arsenic. And we're able to take out 99% of the arsenic and able to dispose of it. We also have another mine called the Beaver Mine, which also was a critical mine when we were working with Agnico Mines. It's a smaller land package, but it's a critical mine because it has the deepest shaft in the camp. Now that one, again, it was just a hand grab out of the waste pile. And now we're talking, Eric, waste pile, because we didn't look for cobalt in those days. We threw it away. So the waste pile, the samples we grabbed out of the waste pile were actually 5% cobalt, about 3% nickel, and about 46 grams per ton silver and some trace gold. Now, what we're trying to do going forward, we kind of accelerate our program. We're kind of doing a three-tier system. We're doing what we call real time. So in other words, we're doing exploration development, which of course is a drilling underground. We're also working with the Re2Ox process to produce a product for the Asian market. And we're also looking at building a mill on the property. So we hired a Woods Engineering to initiate the permitting process to actually install a mill on the property to treat the ore from the whole camp. Now, the critical thing that we have in the camp, we were the only ones who have access to the underground. To get the underground permit took us 16 months. It was quite expensive, but we do have it, and that's critical. And like I indicated, it's easier for us to drill underground and get better results. Now, also by being underground, and we'll also be getting hopefully our permit to start dewatering, because the workings are so large, it might take us 2 to 3 years to dewater, because we're actually going to dewater the whole Goganda camp. Our mine's connected to all the mines in the Goganda camp. And the intent is to dewater, drill, and at the same time develop a mining program to start mining the cobalt-rich veins. So here's a picture of our mine, the Castle mine. What you see over here in yellow is actually the levels. We have actually 11 different levels, and it goes down to about 850 meters. There's 17 kilometers of workings. So we have a lot of work to do just in our mine. Now, we also have 2 other properties, as mentioned. We have the Beaver Mine, the Violet Mines, but our primary focus is on the Castle Mine. As indicated, the Beaver Mine has one of the deepest shafts in the camp, and we're fortunate to get it. It took us 7 years to get this property. It was a very complex acquisition, but we did get it. So now, just to look at our capital structure, we're fairly tightly held. We actually took over a vehicle and put this asset into it. We have about 60 million shares out there outstanding, fully diluted, about 87 million shares. And what we're doing right now, if you notice, our stock price started to move. It's probably the only cobalt stock moving right now. But we felt that, we had a good story to tell, and we're starting to tell it. So I thank you very much, Eric, for listening. And of course, Eric, if there are any questions, please ask. I'll be very pleased to answer them.
Great. So nice and down and dirty and quick. I like it. But there's a few things certainly worth digging into here. So why don't you mention a little bit more about this? It's actually Re2Ox. I thought it or Re2Ox technology that you developed on the separation of the arsenic. So how big of a deal is this? Maybe you can help us just put it in perspective. And did you create this over time?
Well, actually, this process was actually developed and worked on when I was with Agnico, because Agnico at that time, the only thing we were doing was recovering the silver. And they hired me, and I think it was probably the first metallurgical engineer they ever had in the cobalt camp. And I says, maybe we can do something with the arsenic and recover the cobalt. So what we did was we went in the bush, dug up all the stuff we threw over the years, and we dug up 13,000 tons of cobalt con. And get this, Eric, 30 years ago, it was worth $52 million. We spent 6 years developing the process. We got a government grant. In those days, we spent about $6 million developing the process. But at that time, we developed a cobalt carbonate for cattle feed. Apparently, cattle require cobalt carbonate to be able to absorb vitamins, was my understanding. Then the market, of course, for silver was weak. The company shut down the camp. The president died, and then, of course, the new president didn't have any value for his assets. So we went out and grabbed the 2 best valued assets, was the Castle mine and the Beaver mine. So the process now had to be revised because we met with the Asian battery manufacturers. They wanted a different form of not a carbonate, they wanted a sulfate. So we said we can do that. And they gave me the specs. For example, we met with Somito within 2 hours. They gave me the specs. And then we also met with Nissan, and we met with all the Chinese, what they call cathode makers. So in other words, the product first goes to the cathode makers, then it goes to the battery manufacturers. So we got everybody's specs. And so now what we're trying to target is the largest buyer of the Cobalt product. Now, originally they're asking for cobalt sulfate. Now they're asking for what we call cobalt hybrid, which our process can do as well. So they don't just want cobalt; they want a cobalt nickel lithium complex. So we were given the formulation a few months ago when I was in London. Now we're just waiting for what we call the specs, what else they want in the product, and it's an ongoing process. So the work is still going on at Lakefield, SGS Lakefield, and as soon as we produce the product, we'll give them the specs, and then if they want it, for example, a large metal trader in Japan asked us for a 10-kilo sample for evaluation. Based on that product, we're looking hopefully to do either a streaming agreement or some sort of agreement whereby they'd be buying our product. But without this process, and it's not just in the Cobalt camp, we have arsenic. You go through Idaho, we also have arsenic. You go through the Northwest Territories in Yukon, they also have arsenic. And just recently, I talked to somebody in the Philippines and somebody also in Turkey. They both had arsenic. So the arsenic equation, to take the arsenic out is a critical part of the equation. And without the ability to take the arsenic out, and as far as I know, we went to China to see if they can take our arsenic, based concentrates. They can only take up to 5% arsenic. Even then, it was extremely costly. So the intent is, build a process and take out the arsenic and produce what we call a cobalt sulfate or cobalt hybrid, as the cathode manufacturers are asking.
That's great. And so, two things on that note. One would be, well, the way that you're setting this up, Frank, it looks like this isn't going to be a traditional, drill out a resource and then go into the normal sort of equation of starting a mine. I mean, you've already got a lot of infrastructure there. You've got specific specs from customers where you're creating on a small scale product right now. What are your plans in terms of actual commercial production? Is this something that you're going to end up starting on a small scale soon?
There's no such thing as small scale in this game, Eric. What we're looking for is kind of building quite a large mill. It would be a 600 ton per day mill in the Cobalt camp. I already got some demand figures from the Chinese just this week, how much they want cobalt metal. They're giving to me as a metal, but they want it as a sulfate. They want a daily amount, and they want me to scale up. Now, the thing about our process, it's easily scalable. I tell you, it's so simple, Eric. It's, somebody looks at it, it's like making coffee. You go to a Starbucks and says, listen, I want this in my coffee. And that's about it. It's not complicated. It's very elemental. It's actually a green process, and there's actually a zero discharge process. It's unbelievable how simple it is. And without this thing, and it's scalable, like it says, the intent is, like I said, when I met with these Asian buyers, they're looking at quantities of cobalt that's very, very hard to comprehend. And even if all the cobalt did come out of the DRC was accepted as non-conflict, there's not enough around. So you must have heard that, Tesla said they're going to lower the amount of cobalt in the batteries. I knew that a year and a half ago because I met with the Asian battery manufacturers. They have to do it because there's no cobalt. But they can't take the cobalt out of the battery, because they take the cobalt out, number one, the range decreases. The other thing is the battery's not stable. So the cobalt has to stay. And when I spoke to the Japanese car manufacturers, they said, oh yeah, but Toshiba came out with a new battery. And they said, yes, we know that. But they said to commercialize a battery in Japan, which surprised me, Eric, 15 to 20 years to commercialize a new battery in Japan.
So what's your pathway then, Frank? What's the vision in terms of steps that you're going to take to get to the point where you can actually start shipping product? And what kind of time and money investment is it going to take?
Well, we're looking at a 2-year window. It's realistic because I've done this in a camp before. I built a mill, we burnt it, I built it in 4 months' time. And it's not a magical, it's not an impossible task to do. The critical thing here is I have to, I got the specs from the Asian buyers. I think I'll be working with the Asian buyers. About 50% of the battery manufacture comes out of China. So more than likely, I'll be working out the Chinese or Japanese. The realistic time frame is 2 years or less. More than likely, our permits for a mill, we were told by Woods Engineering, should be available by the end of the year. We actually already went out and sourced the equipment. We actually have a debt structure in place already to build a mill. We're talking about numbers already. Now, the refinery, we have to decide how many tonnage. I just got to figure, like I said, this week from the Chinese, how much tons of cobalt they want per day. And the intent is, meet their criteria and be able to expand for it. So we're looking for about 2 years maximum as a time frame. We're fairly advanced. Being underground, it's kind of a critical thing. People talk about infrastructure, always talk about roads and power lines and water. But infrastructure underground is extremely complicated, expensive, and it's very hard to get quality people to do that. So our underground, Agnico, in their day, and this was, like I said, in the 80s, late 80s, they spent over $8 million rehabbing the mine we took over called Castle. Same with the Beaver. So and we got it the Beaver mine, I think we paid $25,000. The Castle mine, I think we paid $15,000 for it. So we paid next to nothing for it. So the value there is enormous, and it's also the time thing. So I think it's possible to do 2 years. We'll meet the specs and, sell the product, and more than likely the product will end up in Asia.
Got it. So on the Re2Ox process, back to this benefit. So is that patented?
We're going to patent it, but it's kind of funny. We're waiting for the design criteria, and then we'll patent the design criteria that the specs that the Asian market is demanding. We're going to focus more than likely, Eric, on the Asian market. We got specs also from the European market. Although it's a cobalt sulfate, they all have different specs. But the Asian market, especially the Chinese market, appears to be the largest globally.
Yeah, and so the second piece to this, though, is also the recovering of lithium, cobalt, other metals from computers and phones. So what are your expectations there? I mean, what do you think is going to end up coming out of SGS, or what's your hope?
Well, what we've done is we've been going through a lot of these conferences. Most of them are in Europe, and it was surprising to hear, and this was really surprising to us to hear, nobody's recycling their batteries. They're kind of holding on to them. They're hoarding them. So, there's one recycler in Belgium, and, we know, and like I said, when we talk to the Asian car manufacturers, there should be tens of thousands of tons of batteries out there being recycled, but nobody's letting them back into the market. Now, we tried our process on that, and lo and behold, our process is able to treat it. It's actually very simple to treat the batteries. The complex thing about treating the batteries is getting them from the people that are hoarding them. For some reason, they're all being held somewhere. And now the government, of course, in Europe, especially in Europe, they want to track this a little better. So apparently they're trying to develop a procedure where they track the battery from, cradle to grave. They want to know where it is, and they want it to be recycled. There's probably more cobalt sitting probably in what I call stored batteries than probably going to be, that we're going to try to mine in the near future. It's hard to believe, but there's a lot of batteries out there just sitting around somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, but what I'm getting at too, and where I'm going with this, digging it a little deeper, is that it sounds like because this process could be extremely valuable, actually required for others in the cobalt camp in Idaho, other areas that have arsenic problems, if you could be processing their ore and adding on this other sort of, call it retail component, with battery extraction, that seems like a separate business. I mean, is that something that you would consider spinning out at some point?
Yeah, actually, Eric, I'm glad you brought it up, because we actually spoke to a few people already, and our intent was to set it as a tolling operation. In other words, we will buy your concentrate, but if you want us to treat your product, we'll treat your product, and if you don't have a buyer, we'll get you the buyer.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a simple process. And when I was in Agnico, that's what we did. We told for everybody. We never bought anything. The majority of our business when I was in Agnico, we had a mill and refinery. We told for everybody in the whole camp.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, would this be something are you set on keeping that under the CCW umbrella, or would it make sense at some point to just have a complete, second business line under a different vehicle.
Well, it's interesting about to have the Asian people we spoke to this week ask us to spin it out. And I said, sure, and they're asked to be partners with us. I said, all right, give me something in writing and I'll pass it by the board. And, if we can make it, we'll do it,
Yep. Yeah, it would make sense to me at some juncture, especially as you're getting the data back on this actually, working. So off to your thoughts on other opportunities in the market versus the value that Canada Cobalt you think provides to the investment community. I mean, we saw with I think it's USCO was bought out as they started to do some underground drilling last year, and First Cobalt is really the big dog in the space. But how do you stack up to them in terms of what you have versus what they have? I guess is the easiest way to put it.
Well, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. It's just that we've been down this road before. The critical thing is you got to produce product that the clients want. And I tell you right now, having a resource, a lot of people drill off a resource and then let's build a mill and then let's build a refinery. And you're talking like 10 years out, like it takes sometimes 2 to 3 years to develop a reasonable resource. Then you do your feasibility study, depending who you hire, and you put all these things together. You're about 6 to 10 years out. We took the other approach. We call it real time. We're doing everything at the same time. And we know the Cobalt camp fairly well. We were here quite a while ago. I'm a metallurgical engineer, and my wife's a geologist, so we know the camp well. So we know where to go for the stuff. We also know how to handle the material. As indicated before, I produce a cobalt carbonate for cattle feed. Now it's just a cobalt sulfate. We can do it. Now, the market will respond better to somebody produces product. I think drilling for cobalt, then at the end of the day, you find out you don't have a market for it because of the arsenic doesn't get anywhere, right? So we'd rather do this. Like we're the only ones in the camp that are building and going ahead building a 600 ton per day mill. Nobody else has a mill in the camp right now. We're going to go ahead and build this leach plant. We haven't decided where to build it. We have a lot of interest from the Asian community and very serious interest. Like even a year and a half ago when we were in Asia, they were interested in doing something with it. Surprised. The Asians knew more about the Cobalt camp than anybody else I've ever came across. They had everything translated to Mandarin or Cantonese or Japanese. They're worried. They're worried they can't get cobalt. Lithium, they're not worried about, but cobalt, major concerns.
Yes, it certainly is. As I've looked into it deeper, I mean, the real risk for somebody like us who is invested in the cobalt space is the price goes up too high, too fast, and then people become so concerned about that one raw material that they just do have to suck it up and go with another formulation. But these things take a lot of time to make those pivots, as you said. With just a new battery component and formulation in Japan. So it's a long runway anyway. But just to wrap it up, Frank, I think what would be helpful for folks is talk a little bit about what do you have in the bank? How long is that going to last you? And then what should investors expect in terms of benchmarks or news flow, through the end of the year?
Well, I think, like I said, we're accelerating our program. They'll be getting drill results. Our intent is actually to lower the grade of the deposit, to maximize the amount of cobalt. We're going to work on this, what we call hybrid. They kind of mentioned it when we met with them in London earlier this year. And it was completely new to us. We weren't even aware that they're looking for this hybrids, which is basically a cobalt, nickel, lithium complex. So they don't want just a sulfate anymore. They want this hybrid. So we're looking more into it. I guess we heard it by chance. Maybe we shouldn't have heard it. But the hybrid is going to be, I think, the new thing. The critical thing is whatever process you have is going to be dynamic, because I think we're going to run out of cobalt. There's no way, Eric, that the world will be able to convert to electric vehicles without cobalt, and there's not enough of cobalt. They got to decrease the amount of cobalt in the batteries. They got to add nickel to it. That's the first time they asked me to produce what I call this hybrid. We have nickel. We've been reporting nickel from day one, not because we knew about it. We just thought it was the next high-paying metal in our deposit. But I was surprised. And we do have some lithium in our deposit, but I won't consider it of any value. But our process does also work on lithium. You know, if you have a lithium deposit, you can make it into a lithium sulfate or make it part of this lithium hybrid. So it's kind of critical. And I think, Eric, I think this is not going to be a short run. It'll be a very long run. And the key thing is to be dynamic, address the needs of the car market, and you should do quite well.
Yeah, and so would it be fair to say, Frank, the people can look forward between now and the end of the year, we're going to have more drill results. We'll have more data from SGS on the Reed 2-ox, and you'll probably have some developments on the mill and other things that are going on underground as well, right?
Yeah, no, we'll have multiple things. More than likely, we might have an agreement by some sort of either streaming agreement or buyer. We might have a home for a refinery. I don't know how serious these Asian people are, but they seem to be a lot more faster moving than we are here in Canada. They have a big concern, Eric. It's unbelievable. Their concern is so serious; it's hard to comprehend.
Right. Well, Frank, it's turning into an extremely exciting story. We'll be happy to follow it, and I'll be releasing this to our folks next week. If we have any follow-on questions, I'll be sure to hit you up.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Have a good day. Thanks a lot.
You too. Have a great weekend, Frank. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.